This is the Energizing India Podcast.
On this show, we typically speak to protagonists who are making policy decisions, regulatory decisions, making cars or running a power grid, sometimes making batteries, or in some form or other participating within the clean mobility value chain. Every now and then, we have the privilege to speak with a super user of electric vehicles to talk about problems, challenges, opportunities, comparisons, and the joys of driving electric vehicles. Today, this is one of those special shows. Today, we speak with Manish Jain. Manish is a super EV user and drives a Kia EV6. He lives in Bombay, but in his previous life was in the USA, where he lived and worked for 35 years before returning to be part of an entrepreneurial journey and adventure in India. Manish started Shaadi.com and later even M-Profit. Names that are almost colloquial to anyone in the tech space, or should I say the marriage space in India. Manish, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Ravin, for having me. And you said privilege, so I don't know about that, but yeah, it's definitely great to be here to talk about everything EVs. Love EVs, love technology, and quite interested to kind of ask you some questions also about, your journey of starting, Quench and getting that brand out there.
Thank you, Manish. When I first saw your name, it's a classical Indian Marwadi name, and I thought he is a man from a factory somewhere who drives an EV6, but I've got a little bit of an American accent in there, and I can't pick whether it's West Coast or East Coast. What's going on in there?
So typical Marwadi name. But I lived in the U.S. for many years. I was born in Pune, surprisingly enough. So I was born in Pune, but my parents moved to the U.S. when I was about 4 months old, and lived about 35 years in the U.S., all over. So lived East Coast, lived in Boston for several years, then the Midwest, Chicago, Southern Indiana, which is in the middle of nowhere. And then I lived the last 8 years before I moved to India, I lived in L.A. So kind of all over. So it's a combination of all those different accents. So I don't have a very heavy Midwestern accent, which I should, but I don't. But that's kind of where you're picking up the accent from, is I lived there for many years. And now I'm in India, and people ask me, I think you were even asking me, why am I here? So the answer I give to everyone is I'm actually being held hostage by my wife. She's got my passport, and she is telling me I got to stay here. So that's the reason I'm here. I didn't go back.
So let's talk about EVs then. You used to drive a Hyundai ICE car, and then about a year ago, I guess you rented a Tesla Model S Plaid, and that changed your perspective on EVs. Where was that, and what changed?
Yeah, so I still have a smile on my face. Every time I think about that Model S Plaid, I just have to smile so last year I turned 50, and I decided I was going to do everything Porsche, and actually everything Porsche 911, because I'm a huge 911 fan. So I went to the US and I decided to visit both of their tracks. Porsche has got one at what they call the Experience Center. There's one in LA and one in Atlanta. So I decided to break it up into two trips, same trip, but two legs. So the first leg was on the West Coast, and that was going to be the green EV type experience. So I was going to rent the Taycan Turbo S and drive it on their track. And then I was going to rent a Model S Plaid and drive it around town for 4 or 5 days. So I did that. But the minute I got into that Model S Plaid, it just completely changed my mind about EVs. I've always been tracking the EV space because, like I said, it's about technology. But, sitting in there and experiencing the torque, the power, the overall user interface, just everything, it felt amazing. It felt like driving an iPhone. If you could drive an iPhone, that's what it felt like. That's what I felt like. It was just amazing. This had the yoke steering wheel. It was great. So you got the full dash. It had everything. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned. So that was the West Coast part. And then I got on the Taycan. I got on the track and drove a Taycan Turbo S. And so I drove the Plaid S to the Experience Center in, I think it was Torrance, California. And as people were waiting for their events to start, everybody was looking at that Model S. They're like, I cannot believe you bought the Model S to this track. And it was stunning. And even the instructor, he was asking me questions about that Model S. He's like, tell me more. I'm like, well, it's got a lot of horsepower and it's definitely faster than this car. So I was able to compare actually the Taycan S versus the Model S Plaid. And I would say, of course, the Taycan definitely has better cornering. I mean, obviously it's kind of got the performance from Porsche and, on the handling. But overall, I think any normal person would just fall in love with the Model S Plaid. So that was the West Coast part. Then the East Coast was all about 911s. So I was going to rent on the track. I was going to do the GT3 RS, the GT2 RS, all of that. So those are the high performance versions of the 911 on a track with an instructor, drive around. And then I was going to rent a Porsche 911 during the day for about 4 or 5 days. But after I'd rented the Model S, I called up and I canceled my 911 for the daily driving. I just canceled, saying I want to rent another Model S. So I got into Turo and I rented a Model S Plaid again. And when my wife heard that, she was like, wow, because she knows I'm a huge 911 fan. I've done the journey to Stuttgart. I've done all of that. So, but I just, when I rented that Model S Plaid again in Atlanta, it was just amazing. Again, it's just everything. They've just packaged it correctly. The way the car handles, the way even the charging station, the whole infrastructure, and that is, full stack. When they talk about full stack, it's everything. It's the car, the software, the charging station. They own everything, and it shows. Everything just worked beautifully, and it was something else. And that really got me thinking that the next car I buy has got to be an EV, no matter what, no matter come high or hell water, I'm going to get it.
And you settle on the best thing available in India, which is the EV6. So you're right about that Tesla getting the whole user experience right. The whole charging experience is so seamless. And the use experience in most cases is quite nice. But I have to say, I disagree with you on the ride experience. It might be because I didn't have the Model S. I rented from Avis in Italy, and all they had was the Tesla Model 3.
Okay.
Quite a big come down. Yes, yeah. I agree. But I found the Tesla incredibly irritating right from the get-go. Yeah, it was... well, maybe because I'm conservative and expect a dashboard that tells me everything right in front of me, and here on the Tesla, everything's on a screen in the center of the car, and you have to interface with the screen to get anything, right? So you want to change the aircon, go back to the screen. You want to change the music, go back to the screen. You want to see your speed, go back to the screen. And I thought that was dangerously distracting because you were getting my eyes off the road every time I needed to do something to the car. And then, we were in Italy, and you know how Italians drive. It's not very dissimilar to driving in northern India. So these alarms were going off all the time as everyone was overtaking, or as we might have been a bit sloppy on the lane. This thing was going off like Apollo 13 with the beeps continuously, and I found that incredibly distracting as well. And finally, the ride experience, just on those southern European highways, which can be not dissimilar to India, where you've got cement surfaces that can be a bit rough, and in the car can be a bit jumpy. So I walked away from the Tesla Model 3 experience, not the Model S, loving my Kia EV6 and my other EVs in India, which are the Tata Nexon and the Tata Tigor. But I did not really enjoy the Tesla. So I wonder what they'll come to India with. So there's two very different experiences here.
So I will say that I think, for me, the torque and the horsepower probably overrode a lot of, my senses, because it was stunning. It just puts you in the seat, that torque
true.
You just feel right away.
True, absolutely right. But now let's talk about your next car, which was the EV6.
Yes.
You had a Spectrum. It's kind of a mid-range car, 60 to 70 lakhs. So in that range, you had the Ioniq, the BMW i4, I think it was. You had the Mercedes-Benz B class electric vehicle, and then you had the Kia EV6. That's the kind of range in the last 12 months. Why did you choose the Kia?
So I feel like there are really three big price ranges. One is where the Nexon operates, then the range you just mentioned, and then the super high end. That's the e-trons, the Taycans, all of those. So the thing is, the Ioniq 5 wasn't available at the time. They were about to announce the launch of it, so it was really down to three. One was the B class, the i4, and the EV6. And again, for me, it came down to the technology. They've got the 800 volt architecture, which is actually it has come from I believe that is also from Rimac. They've used that's Mati Rimac from Croatia. So they've built that high-end architecture, volt architecture. So they're using the same one. So a lot of it was driven by, who's got the latest technology. So it was them, and it was the Volkswagen Group. So they've got that in the Taycan and the Audi e-tron as well. So obviously those were completely out of my price range. So it really came down to the EV6. And that was actually not even really what I was thinking. I was looking at maybe the Nexon, and then so we looked at the MG. But the minute we sat in that EV6, it just completely changed, because just everything, the fit, finish, the feel, everything was just great. It's so true. I can understand why car manufacturers want you to get into the product, because they can just sell you on it. And we sat in that car, and it was like, wow, there's no way we can go back,
It's so true. In fact, it's a better feeling than the BMW i4 and the Mercedes-Benz B-Class. Most people don't get it, that, Kia can position themselves above these two and deliver a better vehicle. It's almost...
So I think the problem with that is a lot of people are looking at the labels, the brand name labels. And in fact, the i4, a friend of mine said, do not get the i4. And this is a friend that has actually worked for a very well-known high-end supercar company in India. And he said, don't buy the i4 because in fact, what they've done is they've taken the regular 3 Series, 4 Series platform and they've loaded it with batteries. So in fact, it's got probably the same ride height as a Porsche 911, which means it's really low to the ground. He goes, you'll be scraping every speed breaker in Bombay. He goes, I wouldn't even look at that car. But he goes, the problem is at that price point, people are going to say, BMW versus Kia. Yeah, and it's a tall order to think that, you'll spend that kind of money on a Korean car, but when you kind of look past it, it's amazing. It's well worth it. It's totally well worth it, And I tell people that it's the car to get, but some people just, they want to, I call them label chasers, and it won't fit in their narrative.
My wife calls them slaves of fashion.
Yes.
So, Manish, you also...
So real quick though, you have one as well, don't you?
I have a Kia EV6, and I have to tell you, I'm at your age group now. I turned 50 during lockdown as well. And, I was a car fan in my 30s and then, got lost in work and the cars kind of got boring, 10 to 15 years ago, they did get boring. And I rediscovered my love for cars with the Kia EV6. And the story here is I was driving around in a Hyundai Ioniq in Sweden. I got corona, was stuck in a hotel room for a week. And then the day I got out of jail, so to speak, I was flying down to Italy for another meeting, and we were transiting in Brussels airport. In the middle of that corridor between planes as I was running was this EV6 with lights on, and it was there, of course, to attract people. And I ran by it, and she was like Miss Universe, and I thought, that's the car I'm buying. What is this car? And I spent 2 minutes almost missing my flight trying to walk around and take photos. But I decided right there, sight unseen, I'm going to buy this car as soon as it's launched. So I never did a test drive. Just as soon as they launched it, I was like, found my way into Kia somehow or the other to make sure I was on the list of the first 5. No,
when you see that car, it looks so amazing. It's so, it's got a great, road presence because it looks so unique, And in fact, I have an Instagram account. I go by Mr. Jain, Mr. Jain, and I'm like known as a car spotter in Bombay. Any high-end car, you'll probably see a picture of it. And it's crazy. When I got that EV6 and I was using public chargers for the first month and a half because my EV charger at home wasn't installed yet, I was going to all these local chargers near my house, and people were taking pictures of my car. And I was like, oh my God, the spotter has become the spotted. And it was crazy. People ask me, can you take a picture? I'm like, you don't need to ask. But yeah, go ahead. And because it just looks so unique and different, you look at the front end, you look at the back, it's great from every angle.
It is a sexy car. So Manish, you also have a YouTube channel, not just Insta, and it's called Electric Avenue. You put out a lot of videos. You have a big following, and one of the recent episodes that you did was to compare the economics of the Creta ICE Hyundai car that you used to have before the EV6.
Yeah.
I'm interested, what were your findings? What were the big revelations?
Yeah, so, people have been asking me, how do you compare the two? And, the thing is, it's tough to kind of talk about like the ride comfort. Most people don't understand. But, the one thing that most people get in India is economics. When you break it down number-wise. And so I recorded that episode. I uploaded it about, I think, 4 or 5 days ago. I must have gotten at least 20, 30 people that have messaged me directly saying, you know what, now I understand the clarity of comparing ICE versus, the EV world, because I was able to break down the numbers. So I'll just quickly run through the numbers. So the Creta I've had now for about 6 years. I've done about 31,500 kilometers. And because of my dad, I've tracked every time I've filled up that car petrol. I've got a Google sheet, so I list every time I fill it, put the mileage, put how much I've paid, so I can get a running average, because people will tell you, oh, this is what they tell you get. I'm like, I know exactly, because I've been tracking it for the last 6 years. So my Creta on average, I get about 8.5 kilometers per liter is what I'm getting. And if you take the current rate in Bombay is about 106 rupees per liter. So if you do the math, it comes out to about 12.5 rupees per kilometer. That's the OPEX or operating expense cost, and that doesn't include oil changes, all that. I'm just kind of setting that aside. This is just pure, what you can say, fuel or energy costs. So that's on the ICE side. If I compare it to the EV6, I've charged enough for the last 3 months at home. I think I've used about 250 kilowatt hour units, and I'm paying around 9 rupees per kilowatt hour. So that's my base cost is 9 rupees. And I would say I'm kind of pretty heavy with the acceleration in my EV6. And I think I get around 5 kilometers per kilowatt hour. So if you do the math, that's about 1.8 rupees. So I'm comparing 12.5 to 1.8. That is a reduction of 85% in cost. And I've heard people getting 6.5, kilometers per kilowatt hour, So I can see why logistics companies, B2B guys, fleets, buses, all those guys are moving towards, because the cost is just amazing. Yes, of course, your CapEx expense getting into a vehicle, whatever that is expensive, but the OpEx is much better. You don't have to worry about theft of petrol, diesel. It's safer, all those things. So that's funny. Like I recorded that episode, it's about 15 minutes, but the thing that anybody cared about was that 45-second snippet of me comparing the math and just showing it. And I can tell you, because of that, I'm sure a couple of my friends are going to buy it just because they see that.
They got it. So what's interesting is that 1.8 rupees a kilometer with you charging at home.
Yeah.
And that's at about 9 rupees a unit. And if you were to charge in a public charging station, you'd be paying somewhere between 17 to 21 rupees for fast charging. And so your 1.8 rupees would become something like 3.6 to 4.5, which is still significantly cheaper than running on petrol. Even with the most expensive charging stations, with fast chargers anywhere in India, that's quite telling. Hey, so you went on to talk about how, as a result, there's 2 markets that are evolving now. One's the delivery, public transport, and the other's personal transport, and you can see why this would happen. What are you seeing in the industry since your eyes open to electric vehicles? I know that when we started, we used to see 1 electric scooter a week. That became 1 a day. That became 1 an hour. And now there's, wherever you look, there's green number plates. And you're starting to see the same with cars, and you're starting to see the same with buses. I'm wondering when the trucks will come, or whether they'll wait for hydrogen or convert eventually. But what are you seeing from your perspective change in the last 12 months?
I mean, so one of the things is I work with a lot of technology startups, and they're saying that, forget about, even the OpEx side, fine. But what they're seeing is the idea of using electric vehicles, whether it's 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, it opens up a lot of different new use cases. So one of the guys I was talking to was saying, if let's say one of my drivers does 10, 15 deliveries for the day, I can give them a bonus and say you can use the, EV 2-wheeler for 1 day. And the thing is, they can unlock it, they can geofence it, all of that stuff, and that's not even possible in an ICE scooter or anything like that. So there's a lot of new capabilities coming up, and I think that's the reason why on the B2B side, whether it's fleets, cab aggregators, buses, we're seeing a lot more, because there's a lot of new things that are happening. I think on the consumer side, and I think you could probably talk to more on the consumer side, why we're not seeing as much of an adoption. I feel maybe could be part of it is the FAME subsidies maybe are geared more towards the B2B side versus the B2C side. But I do see a lot of green plates, but I think it's probably a lot of people like me and you that I don't really try to run the numbers too much, because I know that you really can't make a good comparison. It's just more of, I feel like I like it because I feel like I'm doing something for the environment. I love the tech.